Hello, so today we're going to talk about late game optimizations and how to get the most out of your end game. I'm going to talk about different ways of spiking your board in the late game and how to transition into a very fully fledged strong board. I'm going to give a lot of examples of different boards, and this was a request from a lot of different commenters. I think I had 3 or 4 requests over the last week saying to do a topic like this, so hopefully you guys check this out. But before we do that, please make sure to like and subscribe if you do like my content. I do daily guide content for TFT like this. I also do VOD reviews and sometimes some for fun videos as well. On my channel, though, if you want to know a lot about late game optimizations and how to optimize particular boards, the how to play guides, I have a playlist for it where I go over a particular trait and I talk about all the ways that you can make it spike. These are typically where you would want to look. I will briefly cover a lot of these comps and how they spike in this video just to make this video more conclusive, but I do want to just say, hey, check out that as well. You can also check out memberships if you want additional content and you want to support me in a different way. I also have my art store, which has a new Morrigan piece that I had just finished right over here, which you can check out if you so choose. Now let's get straight into it. So how to spike. Whenever you think about a board spiking, what you're saying is like there's different intervals or there's different points where you either put in a unit or get something activated that makes your board significantly stronger than it used to be. So spikes are very comp dependent, so you really have to understand what comp and units you need for success in the particular comp that you're playing. Certain units want certain synergies active. Obviously, like every unit has their own synergies, and the more of those synergies you have activated will make that unit be more activated. And that's really dependent on the comp that you're playing. Sometimes just putting in a synergy doesn't necessarily make your comp strong. Sometimes putting in a synergy puts you from a spot from going 8th all the way to going 1st. And it's very comp dependent. But often you can also find flexible options that make you stronger. The set does have a couple flexible options which we'll talk about, and it's important to understand these whenever you're leveling up and whenever you're trying to adjust your board relative to the rest of the lobby. But like I said before, it's often very specific to the comp that you're playing. We're going to do a brief overview of all the comps during this video. But like I said before, if you want to deep dive into a particular comp, you can check out the how to play guides as well to supplement this video. So, ways that you spike. There's many different ways that you can spike your board. Whenever you think about spiking your board, you just want to have something get activated to give you some sort of like power boost or power level. So a lot of times in TFT, you're trying to build the traits on the side of your screen. Right on the left hand side of your screen, you have all the little things activated and they go from bronze to silver to gold to like cool colors. That's often a good way to spike your board, is that you're reaching some threshold for a synergy that applies to either your main tanks or your main carry. Additionally, if you're playing rerolls, you can spike really hard once you hit the 3-star unit, because then that unit becomes more active. It has more damage or more tankiness. So that's another way that you might want to consider spiking. And then additionally, whether or not they activate a synergy or not, higher cost units typically are quite strong, and you can just easily just slot them into a board and they will do work. So stuff like 5 costs are really powerful. Things like emissary that give a team-wide buff are very powerful. And then obviously in this set in particular, the addition of 6 costs is just a unit that by definition you just grab it and you throw it on the board. A lot of time these last 3 are a little bit like, they're obviously very obvious. Like I think to most people that play the game, they're like, oh yeah, just put a 5 cost. Oh yeah, just put a 6 cost. That's not really helpful, Fenrir. But the point is that I'm making a contention of, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, a lot of times people overlook these. Like they'll see a 5 cost or a 6 cost in their shop and they'll just be like, whatever, because it doesn't necessarily fit in with their board as they think their board requires to be strong, and then these get overlooked a little bit. So we're going to talk about that as well, and like just like general evaluation of board and how that kind of plays into the fact of how they can spike your board. One of the big things in TFT, I don't know who has to know this. I don't have, like, I don't get it sometimes, but don't get emotionally attached to the pixels, okay? When you're building a board, always look at your board and say to yourself, is the unit or is the synergy or is the thing actually doing something? Don't say to yourself like, you know, that's my girl, you know, that's Maddie, that's my girl. Maddie has to be on my final board because I like Maddie. It's like, if Maddie isn't doing shit on your board, Maddie's not on the team, okay? Whenever you look at your units, you have to say to yourself, are you on the team or are you not on the team, right? If a unit is weak, replace it. If a synergy is not helping, replace it. If you hit some kind of giga unit, it's likely better than something. If you hit a 6 cost, it's likely better than something on your board. If you hit a 5 cost, it's likely better than something on your board. there's a good chance that you could just make your board stronger. Don't get emotionally attached to the stuff. Now, obviously, I'm saying it in a kind of joking way. By all means, if you are a casual player and you like to have fun and this is the way that you play the game, there is no qualms here. I'm making a guide to improve and get the most out of the game. If you want to just play the units that you like, that is totally valid. I come from fighting games, okay? I used to go to melee tournaments playing Ganondorf, okay? For the melee heads that might watch me, you know what I mean, okay? I play Zato and Guilty Gear. Well, Zato was good at the beginning of Guilty Gear, but you know what I mean, right? Like, I played... who the fuck did I play? Okay, in Marvel vs. Capcom, I played broken characters. That's because I like Devil May Cry. So don't at me if you're a Marvel vs. Capcom person. But you know what I mean, right? I'm used to playing for fun or even competing at with stuff that isn't good. But when you're playing to strictly improve at the game, don't play shit units on your board just for fun. Anyways. So let's talk about a general rule of thumb for evaluating a board, and that is gold investment. Now, I'm not sure how intuitive this is, or if this is something that's brought up by other people, or if it's something that you know, but I talk about this a lot. And a good rule of thumb for a balanced game of TFT is the amount of gold that you invest in your board. The total gold value of your board typically should be equal to other board values that are equally as strong as you. And this comes really heavily into play with units, as well as when you're optimizing your board. So here I have a board where I just threw in a bunch of enforcers just because they all share the same synergy. But I'm going to talk a little bit about gold investment. So what do I mean by that? If you think about a Maddie, a 3-star Maddie costs 9 gold, right? A Maddie is a 1-cost unit. You need 9 of them in order to hit your total unit. So this is a 9 gold unit. So this board, if you add it to your board value will be increased by 9. This is 9 gold of investment. A Camille, for example, is 18 gold, right? It's a 2-cost, so it costs 3 times. It costs $2. It's a 2-cost, so that's 2 gold, 9 copies, 18, right? This is gonna be basic math. I know it's gonna be silly. And then, for example, a 3-star 3-cost is gonna be 27 gold. These are your reroll options, right? It's not necessarily for enforcer. I'm not saying this is like a valid enforcer comp. I'm just trying to give you an idea of gold investment in a similar board. So let's say these are all your reroll options. Your other options, these are like non-reroll. I'll just put like default because that's what I like to use as a word whenever I'm not talking about reroll. Usually, if you're carrying a 4-cost, you can't really hit a 3-star 4-cost. That's like a giga win condition. It's very hard, and a 3-star 5-cost is like if you hit it, you just win the game for free. That's how they're designed. So you're usually trying to play around a 2-star version of these units. So if you're thinking about a Vi 2-star costs 3 times 4, 12 gold. And a Caitlyn costs 3 times 5, 15 gold. So this is the gold investment per unit. When you're thinking about the units, sometimes you'll notice that when you're playing reroll, they just kind of fall off. They don't really do the thing that they need to do late game. And a lot of times, the way that TFT is balanced, when it is really balanced, and this set is, for the most part, one of the best balanced sets of TFT that I have personally played. So the set is really balanced. So this does apply in a lot of comps. When you have a 1-cost or a low-cost unit, a lot of times late game, they start to fall off. And it makes sense because they're balanced around being an early game unit that doesn't cost as much gold. So the 9 gold that you're spending on the Maddie is significantly less than both a Vi and a Caitlyn. So typically, when you see a 3-star Maddie and you see a Caitlyn 2-star or a Vi 2-star on your board, it is often significantly better to play around the higher cost units in your late game. This involves transitioning your items and playing around these units. It's just a conceptual way to evaluate your board. If you're looking at your board and you're like, I have a Maddie 3-star, but I also have a Vi 2. Who should I put items on? You should often put the items on the Vi. It's often correct to put on the Vi because the Vi just does more. It has better stats, does more units. It doesn't matter that it's a Maddie 3-star. It's more like, if you evaluate it in this way, it typically makes sense. Now you might say, okay, well the Maddie cost me more than 9 gold because I have to use gold to roll. It's like, yes, and the Vi costs more gold because you have to level. It's same difference, right? The same with a Camille, right? A Camille, if you don't have some of the traits active, if you're just playing around Enforcer and you have the same Enforcer synergy active on the Vi, these units between Camille and between Caitlyn, like this little 3 units in the middle, you can often transition the items over because it's going to do almost as much work, right? Obviously, if you have a Camille 3 and you're playing deep into Ambusher trait, the Camille is probably going to want to have the items. These aren't good items for these units, by the way. I'm just using as an example. but they're comparable, right? The difference between, like, the same with 9 and 12. 9 and 12 is not that big of a difference. So if you have better items for Maddie, it makes sense for Maddie. If you have better items for Caitlyn, however, it starts to get closer. But a lot of times, these units are relatively comparable, because, like, the difference between 18 and 15 isn't that much, and the difference between 12 and 18 isn't that much, and 9 and 18 isn't that much. So based on what items you have, typically it's better to put on the higher cost unit. They just do better things. They have better stats. They have better abilities than the low cost units. If you play deep into the traits of these units, however, it could be still correct to play around these low cost units. The pinnacle of a strong unit typically is a 3-star 3 cost. 3-star 3 cost a tremendous amount of gold. As you can see, a 3-star 3 costs 27 gold. You usually hit them very late into a game unless you're high rolling, and they typically do an insane amount of damage. So I'm sure you've seen TF reroll a lot, maybe outside of Enforcer, and he kind of absolutely deletes boards. And the reason is, it's just like he's like the equivalent gold investment of like almost like 2 Vi's or 2 Caitlyns, if that makes sense. 2 Vi 2s, 2 Caitlyn 2s almost. But when you look at a board, you should always evaluate in a similar way. Your 1 cost and your 2 cost units will eventually fall off relative to your 4 cost and your 5 cost units. If I had the option of putting, like, you know, 2 items on a Maddie 3 or 2 items on a Caitlyn, it's almost, this Maddie is almost always going to be worse than the Caitlyn 2. And this is very obvious because like this is a line that people play. But this is the idea of transitioning late game. You always want to look at your units, and when you have low cost units, you have to actually evaluate whether you structured your board correctly around those low cost units to bring out the most in them. For example, Camille in this case is comparable to some of the other units. If you have deep into the ambusher trade, if you're playing 5 ambusher, yeah, of course not. Of course you're not going to play Vi. Like Vi with no pit fighter, and you have Camille with 5 ambusher, it's like, yes, of course the Camille's going to be better. But if you're playing like vertical enforcer, for example, then it's like, okay, it's hit or miss, right? If I have pit fighter active, right? If I have a Savika on my board, oops, I don't want to scroll too much. Let's say I have pit fighter active. It's like now I have 2 synergies activated on the Vi, and it's like comparable almost in cost. It's like the chances are the items are going to be better on this unit. It's just how the even flow of the game works. So whenever you're playing the game, you should always evaluate your units and understand that, you know, even if you go for these 3-star low cost units, late game it might be better to transition them onto higher cost units. Another example is like with Morgana. Sometimes you have a Morgana 3, and then if you hit a Malzahar 2, you should transfer the items over to the Malzahar. That's another example. And obviously this only works when things are really balanced, because that's just how TFT is a lot of the time. That's like the first concept I just want to teach or explain before we proceed. It's just a matter of intuition to figure out which units often perform better or perform equally as good as others. Now, so what does my comp want? So I'm going to do a brief overview for most comps. This is going to be in tomorrow's video. I actually had done it in this video, but I edited it out because the video ended up being like, you know, an hour plus of me just like ranting about multiple comps. So I'm going to try and trim it down and put it tomorrow. So if you want to see what specific comps want in order to be strong, check out tomorrow's video. But for optimizations, we're going to continue with, should I roll or should I not roll? So this is really important to optimizing, because whenever you're rolling for 3-star units, you're investing gold into your board. That is gold that you're not using to level up, gold that you're not using to put extra synergies on your board, gold that you're not using to find higher cost units that could be used on your board. As nice as it is to have everybody 3-starred, sometimes you have to evaluate whether or not it's worth it. So for example, here I'm going to look at a typical Zeri board that you would have on level 6. A lot of times on level 6, you have a board that looks something like this, right? You play 4 Watcher, you play 2 Firelight, you call it a day, and you're trying to roll for some sort of 3-star front line and 3-star back line. So you know what, let's make it a little bit more simple. Let's remove this guy, and a little more complex, excuse me, and let's put Vlad as well. So whenever you're rolling for a reroll comp, you should always think of it in this way. You should think of it like, I need a 3-star front line and a 3-star back line. It doesn't matter what your comp is. You should always think of whatever cost comp you're playing around. You want a front line of that cost and a back line of that cost, right? If you're playing a 4-cost comp, 4-cost front line, 4-cost back line. Reroll comp, reroll front line, reroll back line. If you're playing around this area, obviously 3-star Zeri, 3-star Mumu, 3-star Vander, 3-star Scar, 3-star everybody is going to be the highest cap version of the board. Yes, if you're trying to optimize the board and you're trying to get the highest cap version, it's going to be 3-star everybody. But you have to take into account the amount of benefits you get from leveling with a comp like this. So obviously, if Zeri is your primary carry and she's your only carry, you always have to 3-star the Zeri. There's pretty much no real other option if you're playing Zeri reroll to not 3-star the Zeri. So whatever your bench looks like, you're often going to be 3-star Zeri. So now what? Now it comes down to your bench. So here I'm trying to illustrate it. I'm using 2 separate boards and there's like a little squiggly line. The squiggly line is representative. This is your bench. These are your upgraded units, right? So for example, let's say I have 3-star Zeri. Then I have Vander 2-star. I have a 2-star Vander on bench. I have a Mumu 1. I have Scar 1, right? If you look here, I have 1 copy of Scar on my bench, 1 copy of Scar on my board. I am very far away from Scar 3, I'm very far away from Vladimir 3, I'm very far away from a Mumu 3, but I'm relatively close to Vander 3. So because I have this unit that can upgrade, this unit that can upgrade, it makes sense to continue rolling on level 6 until I at least have a 3-star front line. Because once I have 3-star Zeri, 3-star Vander, I have a tank that I can put all my tank items on, and a backline unit that I can put all my backline items on. Now, if your situation looks like this, and you don't have that many Vlads, you don't have that many Scars, you don't have that many other things, you want to push levels here. You want to say what's done is done, we move on, we have our 3-star front line and our 3-star back line. Sometimes if you're playing for placements and you don't have, and you're really far away from a front line, let's say this is also like, you know, you're in some really messed up lobby and this is your board. You might still want to push levels, but typically you roll for at least 1 3-star front line, 3-star back line. The reason you push levels is because you have 2 options. And you have 2 ways to cap out your board really high. This is a level 6 board. When you level to level 7, you can put in whoever, but on level 8, you have 1 of 2 ways to cap your board. You're either going to be playing around vertical watchers, where you're playing 6 watcher, or you're going to be playing around 4 sniper, where you're going to cap out around like Twitch and Caitlyn, for example. Now, I think typically speaking, you are a lot higher cap if you play 4 sniper. So playing a board that looks like, I'm just going to put these on the bench. Playing a board that looks like this, 4 watcher, 4 sniper with a 3-star front line is going to be significantly higher cap in terms of it just being stronger. And then if you want to cap out higher on level 9, you can level and then play something else on level 9. However, optimizing the board also takes into account like you playing the board that is correct against your opponents as well. If your opponents are deleting your front line before your Zeri has time to do enough damage, then it might make sense to play Watchers deeper into the trait, because 6 Watcher is also very strong. Additionally, 6 Watcher gives you a little bit less of an opportunity to get wrapped, a little bit less of an opportunity to get scammed out of certain fights, because you have this impenetrable wall of a front line that serves as like a shield for your Zeri and your backline units. So when you but either way, you can't make these decisions to play 6 Watcher or 4 sniper if you're not level 8 already. And a lot of times the units that you need to synergize in order to hit those max caps are going to be 4 cost and 5 cost units. This is a typical thing with reroll comps. So that's why it doesn't make sense to roll. A lot of times people might have a board that looks like this and they're level 7 and they're like, oh my gosh, you know, I have 6 scars, maybe I should roll for Scar 3. And it's like, yes, it makes sense. Like, you know, if you have Scar 3 and you reach this final board, it's also going to be a massively, insanely powerful board. But you have to balance it with leveling for the synergies that work with the particular comp. There are times where, you know, I'm in a really bad spot with a reroll and I'm not close to anybody frontline 3-star or anybody backline 3-starred. And then you have to kind of come up with a creative strategy to maybe like push levels, get in the synergy so you can play for placements at least, because this is a way of spiking your board. So you always have to debate whether or not the 3-star is going to spike your board or not. As a rule of thumb, typically, as soon as you have 1 3-star frontline and 1 3-star backline, you can already start to consider moving on to get the synergies to buff your board. The only reason I would roll deeper in a case like this is, let's say I was like, you know, 1 off of Scar, or like 2, maybe I was really close to Scar 3. Then it makes sense. Okay, I'm really close to Scar 3. Maybe I can pick up the Scar 3 while I'm still at low level and then delay my level up a little bit later. But it's very situational. Or maybe I have like, you know, almost a 3-star Vlad. It's like, well, I can just add Vlad into this board and then I have significantly more frontline, because if I have all of these guys 3-starred, right, then it makes it a lot easier for me to play more damage. Remember I was talking about like if you have enough frontline, sometimes 6 watch you need because your frontline isn't strong enough. If you have a bunch of 3-stars, it makes it a little bit easier for you to justify playing 4 Watcher and 4 Sniper instead, because it gives you a lot more of a stabilization point. But typically, when you're rolling, you don't want to necessarily just try and 3-star everybody for the fun of it, because a board of 4 Watcher, 2 Sniper with everybody 3-starred is typically going to be weaker than if you just have the higher synergies to up your damage or up your front line significantly. So a lot of times 1 is often enough, maybe 2. You'll hear in some other boards that I talk about, I'll say you need 2 damage dealers. That's really important with like quick strikers, for example, right? If you're playing like Akali, Nocturne, Reroll, a lot of times you want to 3-star both of them just because they don't do that much damage individually. So in order to get the most out of your trait, you want to have at least 2 carries because they're melee carries. That's a different style of board, but a lot of the time it's like if you have 2 3-stars, that's a good indicator of I should maybe level. Now there are other boards. This was really common with Renata actually. Like Renata Reroll. Like Renata Reroll, when you're playing around Visionaries, is not as common anymore because the comp kind of got taken out back. But you can see that like a lot of the time you can fit in a completed board at a very low level, especially if you have like a golem or a like extra, what's it called? If you have like an extra emblem of some sort. So like with this comp, because it was a very stall heavy comp, as you can see, the board is pretty much complete on level 7. So a lot of times you would stay a low level and you would go for 3-star literally everybody, because you benefit so much from the comp stalling and scaling with an Archangels. This was something more last patch, so I understand that it's not as relevant this patch, but the reason a lot of times you didn't level that much is because there's not much to level for, right? If you have a Singed 3-star and you're rolling for all of these, it's very efficient to upgrade all of them because the board that relied on most of the units being 3-starred to stall out as long as possible, and you don't get as much of a stall factor by just playing some like unupgraded whatever sentinels. You really want the HP bonus of having the 3-stars in order to make this work effectively. But that was like an idea. And then, you know, because the board is complete, what I mean by complete is that like you can't get deeper into Visionary, you can get deeper into Sentinel, but you know, without emblems you're not going to get deep enough into Sentinel to make it that much of a significant option. So it's something that works out like that. Another example is family. So family, a lot of times, you know, there's different ways to cap out this board. We talked a little bit about it before, but with family, you either want to play deeper into Watcher or deeper into your other units. But a lot of times you don't have items for everybody. A 3-star unit without items doesn't do anything. That applies to all the boards we're talking about. If you have a 3-star unit and they have no items, they're pretty effectively useless. They often die very easily. So a lot of times when people are playing around family, they get really fixated on, I need to get everybody 3-star before I can move on. If I don't have Darius 3, Violet 3, Vander 3, Draven 3, Powder 3, I'm not going up to level 6. And it's really hurts your max cap a lot because you're wasting gold that you're not able to hit higher cost units. If you're trying to optimize around family, having a 3-star Darius with no items is effectively useless. A lot of times, a 3-star Darius is arguably not even as good with 0 items as a single copy of Garen, because Garen at least gives HP to your other units that probably have items. And a lot of times people get fixated on, oh, I've got to have items, I gotta have items, I gotta have items. Unless you're in a galaxy or an encounter that gives you a lot of items, or your augments give you a lot of items, you're not going to have enough items to itemize everybody. So these 3 costs, they're efficient when you're rolling. Like if you pick them up while you're rolling for the other units, yes, you can 3-star all of them. If you're in a spot that you think you can 3-star all of them, yes, this is a higher cap because you 3-star all of them. But what's more important? 3-star Darius with no items? Or 3-star Powder with no items? Or is it more important to get the synergies for your Darius and your Violet? So a lot of times if you're trying to cap out this board, you don't even care about these units, right? Like these units can be 1-star, right? It does not matter. Even Vander sometimes can be 1-star, because what ends up happening is you play deeper into one of 2 lines. You either play deeper into Pit Fighters, where you do something like this, which allows you to play more towards like, you know, Vi and the Draven. Draven reroll is also really prevalent. It's a different variation. We're talking about family here. So, you know, I'm thinking about Violet as a primary, so that's why we're caring more about the family units and everything. But if you're playing like Violet primary and you don't have Draven items, typically 6 Pit Fighters are really high cap. If you're playing around Draven primary, which sometimes you do, which is like more like Pit Fighter and not specifically family, then often you can play deeper into the Watcher trait. And you could play this variation, which caps extremely high, which we talked about yesterday and probably a little bit today. I can't remember what I cut from the video yet. But you play something like this, where you get the Watcher activated to stall out long enough for the Gwinsus to stack up on the Draven, and then you have the Echo as a secondary carry, which will do more damage than, you know, Echo with items is going to do more damage than a Darius 3 with no items. You know what I mean? That's like the idea that you want to go for. You want to make sure that whenever you hit a unit, you have to critically ask yourself, is hitting the other unit actually going to do anything, or am I better off just leveling in order to play around my other units? Because you want to play deeper into traits that either support your unit, something like Watcher, where you have a Gwinsu user so that he stacks up really high, or you want to play deeper into something like Pit Fighter, where you give your Violet a lot more potential to 1v9 and win out the game. Playing towards the units that have items, you should always be like a feast or famine, right? You should always be feast or famine. You want to have synergies as well as reroll units and have itemizations that work towards the units that have items. That's the most important thing you can do. Unit transitions. So in terms of unit transitions, there are quite a few. Now, the thing about late game caps and like capping out a board really high, it's actually very difficult, and I think it's a hard concept sometimes. You always want to be building towards your highest cap units, and a lot of times that's building around units you don't have, either 4 cost or 5 cost units. Additionally, you also have to be stable at a lower level. There's often critical junctures in a game of TFT where you have to look at your spot and you have to say to yourself, what am I playing for? Now, I did a video where I talked about playing for placements and going first versus going 8th and all of that. That was a previous guide that I made. But what you really have to think about whenever you're making your itemizations is, can I transition these late game? Am I going to reach a late game where I need to transition them? Or do I have to make sure that I have my perfect items on my unit to make sure that I win for free right now, and then I just bleed out and I get a top 4? Sometimes you can hurt your max cap with your itemization, but you should also be aware of how much more powerful 5 costs are for particular lines. There's no example greater than with Rebel. So with Rebel, a lot of times you're building around Zoe. Zoe's best items, I think it could have changed because patches change and stuff like that, but last time whenever I talked about it, it was always like you want to build a lot of crit damage, and if you're playing specifically Rebel Zoe, she gets a lot of attack speeds from Rebel, so Gwinsu is a little bit better than some of the mana generation items. I think Adaptive Helm is quite good on her as well, but for sake of example, I'll say Gwinsu, and then I'll put these type of items. With Rebel, often if you don't have Jinx, you're kind of fucked. You're just kind of screwed. Things are bad, things don't work out well, and you're probably not going to get a top 4, or you're going to get like a 4th and you just slide by if you have a lot of HP. So always, as soon as you have a Jinx, you want to transfer items onto the Jinx. Gwinsu isn't that good on Jinx, so a lot of times when you're playing around Rebel, a lot of people will play Shojin on Zoe, because it's not that bad on Zoe. It's like okay, it's just not as good as Gwinsu. But the idea is that you can do a late game transition once you find a Jinx. Now, if you're in a spot where you're like, I'm going to level 9, I know for sure I'm going to hit a Jinx, or I already have a Jinx, making a mana gen item on Zoe isn't like, you know, it's not like, oh, I'm a bad TFT player. The reason is that you can just move them later, right? The Zoe is not, even a Zoe 2 is not going to be as good as a Jinx 1 a lot of the time with Rebel. So a lot of times having items, especially Guard Breaker. Guard Breaker is a really common item that you see for multiple reasons. It's good on everybody. It's overpowered for what it is. It makes good use of components because Glove doesn't make many good items a lot of the time. And Belt also is a little bit awkward if you're not making utility items. So it's a good item, works on multiple units, and it synergizes really well. So you can actually move your items and do late game transitions. You shouldn't necessarily start your game out by making all Jinx items, saying I'm going to make Jinx items and I'm playing around Jinx. But as soon as you have a Jinx, you want to transfer items that are flexible over onto the Jinx in order to do the damage. It's the same with many units. Some units don't have as wild of transition. If you're playing around Visionary, like 6 Visionary Heimerdinger with the Visionary emblem, I think is still something that's kind of relevant. It got a little bit nerfed this patch, but the idea is like if you have items that you're building around a Heimerdinger and you're able, or you hit a Malzahar later, he does so much more damage, you just transfer the items over. The same with like a sniper, like if you're playing not like deep into Experiment where you're activating the Twitch a lot, moving the items onto the 5 cost is really important. You're not necessarily building like, you know, I'm gonna build a blue buff and put it on the the Twitch in order to transfer it later, it's like, no, I'm gonna make the blue buff later if I can. I'm gonna make items that are good on Twitch, and then the items that I can transfer over, I'll transfer over once I have an item set or I have an upgraded Caitlyn too that the Caitlyn's gonna carry over. It's also important with stuff like Academy, which we talked about a little bit in many other videos. I talk about Academy a lot of the time. But if you have deep into the Academy trade and you have a Jace 2, this unit's going to do so much more damage than Corki a lot of the time that you just transfer over your items. You find a similar unit that can hold items in your game, make you stable on your level 8 or level 7 or whatever level you are, and then as you find higher cost, more valuable units that do more damage, you then do the transition late game onto those units. Another way you can cap your board at almost every stage is by playing an emissary unit. So this is something that I want to show you guys just in case you don't know what to play. If you have a vacant spawn on your board, emissary units are extremely powerful. Now, why are emissary units so powerful? Because if you read the emissary trait, I'm going to try and find it, they give a team-wide buff, right? So they give an emissary bonus where they're either going to give you armor if you're playing Ambessa, HP if you're getting Garen, he gives it to like the ally to the left and the right of him, so it's a little bit more situational. Nami, which gives extra mana to everybody, and Tristana, which gives attack speed to everybody. So these buffs are really important, and a lot of times if you're looking for a unit to play and you're trying to push levels, playing an emissary unit is often the correct decision. Here I have another example with family. This is one that just works really well because it kind of like alternates with the synergy that you put in. Let's say you're playing family and you want to play around vertical pit fighter. As such, you want to play something like 6 pit fighter. You're not just going to teleport to having a Savika and playing 6 pit fighter. So a lot of the time what ends up happening is you have a board that looks like this, and then who is your next in? Who's the next unit that you play? You might look at it, you might say, okay, I'll play Urgot. He has some Sundering, he has some Shred. He has some Sundering, he helps out the board a little bit. But often what you can do is you can kind of alternate because you're climbing up this pit fighter ladder over time. You know, after you have your Violet 3-star, your Draven 3-star. You can play Tristana. Just give everybody attack speed, right? Then next level up, so now you're level 6. Let's say you get to level 7. Now you can fit in 2 pit fighters. Now you're 4 pit fighter. Buff your Violet, buff your Draven. Okay, now I'm level 8. What do I do on level 8? Play an emissary board. Wow, you just buff your whole board with an emissary unit. So now you're 4 pit fighter and your emissary instead of just playing a random. Like, you could still play a random pit fighter because it gets the benefit of 4 pit fighter, right? There's not a problem with playing 5 pit fighter. I'm just saying a lot of times if you don't have them upgraded, they're not doing much on your board, just playing a random emissary on these level ups is good, which is why you should always look to hold on to emissary units. Even a Nami, like, I know Tristana fits because it's artillerist and it's cool. It's like, I'm not playing because it's artillerist, I'm just using it as an example. This can easily be a Nami, and then by the time you make it to level 9 and then you find your Savika, you can drop the emissary unit. It's just a way of thinking about the game where you should always hold on to these team-wide buffs and just slot them in whenever you can. And that's like a really important trait to have while you're playing the game. Finally, adding a 6 cost. This one kind of sucks. But we're going to talk about 6 cost and 5 cost. A lot of times 6 cost, even with a TG, are extremely strong. So a lot of times you want to play the 6 cost. They're kind of annoying. They are what they are. But most of the time they're going to do as much damage, if not like, you know, around like half, somewhere between half and as much damage as your main carry a lot of the time. Because they are just like giga broken, really strong units. I don't really like the idea of 6 cost, but you got to be prepared to play around them. If you're looking for somebody to put in on a level up, it's almost always a 6 cost. It doesn't matter which one. Usually any of them is good. Victor, I think, is the easiest to just play with no items, because if you have no items for him, you just put him in and he just does the stun. So he just gives you a stun. It's great. The other two, Mel and Warwick, usually you want to have items on it. Mel is really good at casting and doing a lot of spread damage. So stuff like red buff or Morello and where's red buff? Red buff and blue buff. Like, these type of items are insanely strong on Mel, and she's also a really good holder of emblems. The same with Warwick. Warwick, he just kind of attacks like crazy, so any melee items are good, but also tank items are good. This guy just doesn't die, so if you give him really good tank items, or you give him like melee bruiser style items, things like, you know, Titans, Starex, Bloodthirster, or even just like regular tank items like Protector's Vow, Adaptive Helm, like anything like that, he'll kind of pop off. And that's like a really strong thing that you always need to look for. If you're thinking about, should I play like, you know, some random 1 cost? Like, a lot of times, if you hit a 6 cost, for example, let's go back to the family board, just for sake of example, right? If you have this family board, and you see a Victor in your shop, You can't be like, well, I can't play Victor because I really need to play these units. It's like there's usually always a unit that you can just drop because they're kind of shit and they're not doing anything. You know who that is here? Darius. Who cares about Darius? Like, Darius doesn't give that many stats. You're not playing Deep into Conquer, so Draven isn't getting that many stats from the Darius. And the Darius is giving Watcher to your Vander. Like, unless you're Vander 3-star, it probably doesn't matter. And even if you're Vander 3-star, it's only 2 Watcher. A lot of times, it's better just to play a 6 cost. Now, that's not always the case. Obviously, like, if your Draven is your main carry and you have a lot of Conqueror stacks, keep the Darius in. If your Vander is 3-star and you're... You know what I mean? Like, situationally. But if you look at your board and you have like a 1-star 1-cost unit on your board just for like 2 little shit synergies that both do not affect your main carry, right? Like Watcher and Conquer, if your Violet carry aren't affecting the Violet, you're playing deep into Pit Fighter here. You're better off just playing a 6 cost because the buff and the power that you get from the 6 cost is going to be significantly more substantial. And a lot of times transferring the items over to them is going to be the correct decision. I think I gave the example with Enforcers before as well, right? Like if you're playing around Enforcers and you have like, oh sorry, this was in my Enforcer video, not in this particular video because I cut some content in this one. But like a lot of times, like if you have an Enforcer emblem and you have like an Mbessa and you just have an Mbessa 1, 0 items with an Enforcer emblem, it's like it's just better to transfer that onto a Warwick. A lot of times, just like if you have spare items and they're on a unit that isn't doing that much damage, you put them on a higher cost unit and they're usually going to pop off. This doesn't only apply to 6 cost, however. This is something that applies to all units in general, right? If you're playing around family, it doesn't have to be a Victor, right? If you have this board and you just run into a Jace, what do you think is better? 2 Watcher for this guy or a Jace frontline with a bonus crystal? Especially if you have like a Jace 2. A lot of times, even 5 costs follow the same principle. If there's a unit that isn't giving critical synergies to main carries on your board, you can often drop it for other units. Now, obviously, I'm using this as an example. If you're playing deeper into Conquer or you're playing Draven carry, there is a chance that you need Conquer in. There's things like that. If you have Watcher and you need Watcher in, there's things like that that matter. I'm not saying this is always how you optimize family, because we did a family guide yesterday. I talked about it a little bit there. But I'm just trying to say, conceptually, when you're looking at your board, you should always look for units that aren't doing anything and replace them with higher cost units. Because if you're going to have a unit idly sitting by, it's better to have a unit with better stats and better effects to idly sit by. Would you rather have an idly sitting by 1-star unit that doesn't do any damage and dies instantly? Or would you rather have an idly sitting by guy with a respawning crystal that has 900 health that respawns every time he casts, so you have a 900 HP respawning target dummy? The crystal has more health than the Darius, I think. Like, I don't know 100% of the time, but I'm pretty sure the crystal is a respawning more HP version of Darius in this particular example. So you have to weigh the pros and cons of it, and it's very specific per each board, which comes into more of like when I specifically dive into each board, which is something I'm not doing particularly well right now. But that's like the idea when you're optimizing your board. Now, a lot of it comes down to your late game. This is a little bit of an aside before we end the video, right? This is the thanks for watching. I'm still going to talk for a little bit. A lot of times when you're thinking about your board, a lot of times this part is the most critical, that is hard to grasp and is really difficult. A lot of times you might be really strong early, really strong in the middle, really strong late, and then all of a sudden you end up 5th. There's an element of greeting, an element of playing for first, an element of playing for placements. I made other guides on this, but the idea is this. If you have perfect items on your carry, you'll always outcap people. For example, if you have perfect items on a Jinx, this will always be the most optimal, highest cap version of the board. However, when you're playing TFT, you can't just start the game and be like, alright, I'm going to make perfect Jinx items and I'm going to hit a Jinx. This game is going to be my Jinx game. Unless you're playing in a lobby filled with people that aren't really understanding what they're doing or playing the game, that's not a valid strategy. What you need to do is you need to build items in a way that's flexible, that you prioritize your mid game, stay alive in your mid game, and then have enough time, HP, money, resources, all of that in order to hit the 5 cost, hit the higher cap version of your board, hit the 5 cost, the 6 cost, the upgraded 4 cost, whatever you need to hit, and then also have items for them. Sometimes the game doesn't work out. You don't have perfect items for your carries. Sometimes it works out. You have perfect items for your carries. You always have to make do with what you can, and you have to also recognize what your position is in the game. If you have perfect jinx items and you don't have a jinx, that is equally as bad as having a jinx without jinx items. You have to find a middle ground based on your spot, and a lot of it depends on other people's spots as well. If I'm playing around Rebel, right, and I don't have a jinx, I can't really build around jinx items until I have Zoe items first. Because if I don't build Zoe items, I'm going to lose in my mid game. If I build jinx items without a jinx, I have no items for Zoe. I'm not going to put IE on Zoe. Like, what am I going to do? This is going to be my build? It's like, yeah, okay, then somebody's going to say, okay, just put them on Ezreal. Ezreal's an AD unit. It's like, it's still not that strong, right? What I'm saying is if you don't have 3 items on your main carry in the middle of your game, you're probably going 8th anyways. So a lot of times optimizing your board, you have to decide whether what you're playing for, right? If you're playing for a first, then yes, you want to reach the highest cap version of your board, build towards the highest cap. If you look around and there's already a bunch of people that are really strong than you, then you want to preserve HP. Maybe you'll high roll a jinx and jinx items later, but if you build around the units that you're playing around, you're a lot more consistent in that climb, or in my opinion at least. Or this matters a lot more if you're actually trying to climb like to Masters or something. I think beyond Masters it's like a lot more difficult because you actually have to make really informed decisions on your placements. But the idea is that if you're not playing for first and there's somebody else that already has a win condition and you're just trying to play for placements, you want to make sure that you're strong at every level of the game. So you can't just like, you know, build towards your highest capped optimized board. A lot of times it's a balance of understanding, okay, if I make these items that are slightly inferior and I save a bunch of HP, there's a chance that other people will become way stronger than me late game because they will have either a better board or a different way. So you always have to identify which ways can I spike my board and then use that in order to maximize your placements. Now, tomorrow, I did it in this video originally and I cut it because it made the video a +1 hour long and it was just horrible. So, and I was out of breath. So I cut that content. Tomorrow, I will talk about every single comp in a very condensed way, similar to my how-to guides, except like maybe like 1 or 2 minutes per comp. And I'll try to put timestamps on it. I originally put it in the middle of this video, but I cut it out because I think the video was way too long and I didn't want people to get bored. So I'm going to do that tomorrow. But thank you for watching. Hopefully you have a great day and see ya. Bye-bye.